Okay, thank you. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on during the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphones muted unless I invite you to speak. Please click on the raised hand function if you want to ask a question or make a comment, and then I'll invite you in to comment. There's always a risk that we'll run into technical problems. I'd ask you to be patient, and if this does happen, we may need to declare a short adjournment while the fault is addressed. If I disappear for a technical issue, my Vice Chairman, Councillor Hoy, will step into the breach until I'm back. If it's not possible to reconvene the meeting, it may be abandoned and we'll reconvene at a later date. Please also note that to facilitate discussion, I intend to waiver the committee procedure rules limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I think you're all familiar with that. I also propose to allow members to speak more than once on each item, but I just remind you to keep your contributions precise and to the point. And finally, I would remind members and officers that all virtual meetings are being streamed and live recorded. We'll move on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence. I'll begin the meeting by calling out the names of members of the committee present to establish your presence if you just say when I call out your name. So, Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Present.
Councillor Downs. I can see you, Peter.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Every.
Present.
Councillor Goldsack, who was going to sub for Councillor Wisson, who sent her apologies.
Just joining, Chairman. Sorry to interrupt.
That's absolutely perfect. Perfect timing. So I'll just let his audio connect and then I'll ask him to. Councillor Goldsack, we're just going through the attendance. Could you confirm you're present? Thank you for joining us.
Present. Sorry for the delay.
That's absolutely fine. I know there's been some technical issues. Thank you. Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Hoy.
Present.
Councillor Netzinger.
Present.
Councillor Simon Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Whitehead.
Present.
And then we've got our 2 co-opted members, Andrew Reid representing the Church of England Diocese of Ely.
Present.
Good afternoon, Andrew. And Flavio Vitesse representing the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia. I don't think he's sent his apologies, Dawn, but I think we'll just, if he may show up, given the technical issues that some people have had. Okay, and then obviously you've got myself, Councillor Bywater, chairing. Okay, so we'll move on to declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare a disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest in relation to the agenda items? You can do this at any time during the meeting. If you want to bring it to my attention as we go on to each agenda item, please do so, and we'll address it at that point. Okay.
Chair, Councillor Ambrose Smith has actually indicated.
Oh, sorry, David. Please come in.
Sorry, I didn't know whether you were using the raised hand function. I have to give I have interest in agenda item number 6 at 3.1 to 3.4. I'm a school governor and I'm also chair of the trustees for the Littleport Leisure. So I'll have to leave the meeting at agenda item 6 and I'll come back in when I can. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Just so you're aware, when we reach that item, Democratic Services Officer will temporarily remove you from the meeting and then they'll re-invite you to join once the decision's been made. Okay, so I'll leave that in the capable hands of our Democratic Services Officer when we reach that point. Okay, just bear with me while I move on. Okay, minutes of the meeting on the 7th of July 2020. We're being asked to approve the minutes of this meeting as a correct record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to click on the raised hand function on the right of your screen now, or if I don't see any hands, I'll take that as agreed. There's no hands up, and I will take that as carried, and I will sign a hard copy once I get eventually back into the office. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the action log. An updated action log was included in the published pages for this meeting. However, we had an updated action log sent to us yesterday with red amendments to it. So I thought this would be most useful for people to see what's happened. Has anybody got any comments they want to raise on that newly updated action log? Okay, I don't see any members wishing to speak, so I'll take that as noted. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5, standing item petitions of
Sorry,
public.
Chair, sorry. I don't seem to have got the updated meeting thing. So is it all right if I have a look at it subsequently? And if I've got any queries, I could perhaps email them to either John or Lou.
That's absolutely fine, Joan. Rashenda and Dawn, can you just make sure that Councillor Whitehead gets a copy of that, please? The email was sent yesterday, but we'll get that to you, Joan. And if there's anything of issue, please raise it to me. So getting back on track then. So petitions, we haven't received any public questions or petitions, so we'll move on to the next item. This item is agenda item number 6, which is the Service Director Report for Education. Item 6 of the Service Director Report is being presented by John Lewis, Director of Education. I'll ask John to introduce the report in a second, but just also to make you aware that Councillor Schumann, as the local member for Burwell, is also here. Welcome, Josh, and I will invite you once John has introduced the paper to come in and join us and comment, okay? So John, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read the paper. There's a huge amount in here, so I'm not intending going through every part of it, but I will obviously pick out the highlights as I go through. What I've tried to do is really give you that oversight of the education portfolio, both the response to COVID and some of our plans for how we're restarting education. And obviously we're going to come on to a later report around that recovery item. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail there going forward. I did want to spend a little bit of time though, however, on section 2, which is the sort of update report. In appendix 1, you've got the latest position as it was at the end of August, start of September, in relation to my highlight report and the key areas of change. I think it's fair to say we had a fairly rough time of the bank holiday weekend when significant amount of guidance was released. We obviously did a huge amount of work to try and support our schools and early years settings to be ready for opening. And I'm really pleased to say that we have had a positive start to this academic year. And we're just starting to get through some of the reporting that looks incredibly positive at the current time around attendance in schools. I did in the report in 2.4, I just wanted to really labour this point a little bit around the response that's happened in Cambridgeshire. I think it's fair to say that the education sector, I know we've had conversations in the past about fragmentation and the role of academies, the DFE's role, the local authorities' position, how that's changed. I think the one feature we can be incredibly proud of is the way that we've all come together during this COVID situation. Shared our expertise, looked at the things that were challenging us, and made sure that actually it was about children, it wasn't about structures. So I have named a few individuals in there, including one that's on this this conversation in Andrew. But all of those players, so Andrew, Tracy, Mark, Kim Taylor, and the people from the RSC team really did work so effectively together. And I think that has made a huge difference and probably why our attendance is so high and why we've had relatively low levels of issues going forward. So I would like to put on public record my thanks to those individuals for the hard work that has happened. Moving on to section 3 of the report, obviously what I've then tried to do is go through each of my sort of assistant director areas and pick up various issues. I think we've got a recommendation that we need to come back to, which I think Simon will work through, but just to briefly run through the areas that I think are key. We have been doing some work around the Liverpool Leisure Trust. There's the opportunity to purchase some land in lieu of future development in the Liverpool area, and our need to safeguard the ability for us to increase the capacity of the secondary school in Liverpool. And would very much make an officer recommendation to you, obviously subject to CNI and agreement to buy the land. But actually, for educational need, we see this as a key opportunity, and we very much welcome your support with it. And obviously, happy to have that conversation. We've also been busy focusing on areas such as admissions. We've ran our admissions process pretty much normal throughout this period. We haven't been allocating children, but we've still had new admissions into reception in year 7, all of which went smoothly. And obviously one of our functions is to oversee the determined admission arrangements for 21-22. And we have made some adjustments. So in the report, Eastfield Infants has seen a reduction in its PAN, and we've also sought to reduce the PAN at Burwell, both in line of demand for school places and obviously also with a view that we are trying to be receptive to meeting local need, and we do have flexibility in both areas to increase those if the local demand dictates that's the situation. In terms of the rest of the area and Hazel's portfolio, I've included information about the post-16 review that we've done and how we feel there is sufficient provision with the new schools opening and the capacity that's in place. And we're currently talking to our sixth form providers about how that may move forward. I've included some details that has come from the Learning Alliance, which is a newly formed academy trust from the Cambridge Education Trust and the Morris Education Trust, who are opening the new sixth form mathematics school because we felt that was useful, and colleagues from the new Academy Trust were very keen that you understood that. But we've also included then information on specific services, so the Duke of Edinburgh service, which unfortunately we are discontinuing as a result of the changes that are going on with awarding bodies. But we've included details around education ICT, the music service, attendance, home to school transport, and our place planning and safeguarding functions, which I think you'll find useful in terms of our response for how we get schools back and reopen. And the next section is around schools and settings improvement. Again, an oversight of what's happening in early years, the work we're doing around school safeguarding and trying to improve the quality of our challenge and support there. The huge amount of work we're doing on curriculum and recoveries. And we also wanted to share with you the changes that we've made with our outdoor centres, and we're certainly seeing movement in terms of the aspiration to keep those as viable entities which benefit the children of Cambridgeshire. The final section is around SEND. We've covered how we've reopened our special schools. Again, a real strength of partnership is the way we work with them. We are moving back into business as usual around education, health and care plans. So we've given you some of the information about what we've done over the summer and how we're moving forward, with some strong messages that actually one of the benefits of COVID is that we've caught up a lot of the areas where we were falling behind in terms of statutory turnaround on education, health and care plans, and we're in a positive position moving forward. And then finally, the last section is all around the work we're doing around SEND and recovery, including the savings that we are looking to make as we move forward in terms of that challenge we have around balancing our high need budget. And I think we'll be back to the either October or November meeting with the budget proposals for 21-22. So I'm going to pause there. That's just a quick run through. Happy, Chair, to take questions that the members have.
Okay, thank you, John. Joan, I do see your hand up and I see other people's hand up, but just bear with me a second, because I just want to introduce Councillor Schumann, who's asked to speak against this report in his capacity as member for Burwell. Councillor Schumann, you have 5 minutes to share your views to the committee. If you could just sit tight, and then I'll ask if any members have got any questions in relation to your comments, and then I'll take members' general questions in relation to the report. So Councillor Schumann, if you're there, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Simon. And you'll be delighted to know that I won't be 5 minutes. I won't be hopefully anywhere near the 5 minutes. But I just wish to place on record my thanks to John and the team, who have reassured me that with the changes to Burwell Village College, there was still, and as John just echoed in his summary, flexibility if there were need for further places at Burwells for children in the area. So firstly, thank you very much for that. Having represented the ward at Fordham, where a large number of children were unable to get to their local primary school, and the fleet of foot action of the council meant they did get in for the September start, but I didn't want us to find ourselves in that position again. So I just wanted to note that firstly, and also Chairman, just to note in the report, there is a comment that part of the reason for the low numbers was due to the development in Burwell not proceeding, And then it goes on to say we're not going to be houses in time for there to be the need for the school places. And I just, firstly, to declare an interest, I am a member of a non-executive director of This Land, who are developing the 350 houses in Burwell, representative on behalf of the council. But I just wanted it noted that the planning application is proceeding. It's just the nature of a 350 house application means that these things do take time quite often. And so it is still online to be built in accordance with the time plan set out. But the houses, the report's absolutely right, won't be occupied for at least 2 years yet. But the planning applications are proceeding, in, as I said, in line with the timeline. So they're the only two very brief comments, Chairman, and thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Schumann. Just in order just to avoid confusion, is any just raise your hands visually if anybody wants to ask Councillor Schumann a question. I can't see anybody. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you very much, Councillor Schumann. Okay, so
Thank you, Chairman.
now,
with your permission, I'm going to nip off because I have another meeting to attend, but thank you very much.
That's absolutely fine. Totally understand. That's fine. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Josh.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so we'll now open it to debate. First on my list is Councillor Whitehead. So away you go.
Thank you, Simon. Most of my questions do relate to section 3. Starting with paragraph 3.5, it's just a very quick question. Do we know why the Eastfield Infant School wanted to reduce their PAN? I don't know whether Jonathan wants to answer the questions as I go along, or whether you want me to give them all to begin with. How do you want to play that?
John, what are you comfortable with?
Yeah, one at a time would be great, because my
Okay.
memory's not great at the moment.
Okay, well, the first one is, I just wondered why, in fact, Eastfield Infant School, this is paragraph 3.5, had requested a reduction in their PAN.
So you'll be aware of the ongoing conversation we've been having around Eastfield and Westfield Junior and a merger longer term. Originally, we were intending looking at a PAN of 90, and the demographic within St Ives has declined quite dramatically. We want to manage PANs because it makes the organisation of schools much more straightforward. So to operate in class sizes of 30 with two classes is much more sensible than going for a PAN of 90 and then ended up with 63, 64, which is very difficult to deliver an education for. So it's about managing a PAN number, and we are very supportive of that, particularly in light of the work that we're going to be doing going forward about modernising the site, because the proposal to now merge is now off the table, but we are going to be doing some remedial work to the capital fabric of the building.
Thank you. Next one is paragraph 3.21 about the maths school. I don't know whether we've got any influence here, but I mean, these kinds of very, very specialist schools do concern me a little bit, in that they often provide a very kind of narrow education. I mean, I know if you're, only doing 3 A levels, doing maths, further maths and physics is very common. But if you're in quotes, a normal school, a sixth form college or a school, a sixth form, you do have access to other kinds of things, such as the arts and music and other kinds of activities. And you're not so narrowly focused. And I just don't know whether the schools like this, whether, they have opportunity to actually look beyond, the narrow concerns of maths and science and computing science and actually participate in other kinds of activities. Because as I say, they do concern me, these very specialist schools, particularly at A level. And I don't know whether we have any say in that or any influence, or whether we can ask any questions about it. But I am rather concerned about the sort of very narrow focus without the idea of extracurricular activities, which you will probably get in a normal sixth form college, and an opportunity to interact with other pupils doing very different subjects. I don't know whether we have any option to make any comments, or whether other people would agree with my concern about the narrowness of the curriculum.
Well, I think, Joan, part of the reason for bringing it here is for this very purpose. So I will take that back and feed that back into the Academy Trust. If you go down a little bit further in that section, it does talk about other subjects. And yes, it's very focused on physics and computer science and other areas, but I can certainly raise with them, the opportunities to study other subjects, or how they might work collaboratively with other sixth forms to provide subjects if they're not going to be delivered there. So I'll take that one away and come back to you if that's good.
Thank you. When I was in the sixth form, I admit that's a long time ago, you had to do what they call general studies alongside, and it was just, you know, an opportunity to study a whole range of things. I remember doing a course on atomic physics and meteorology, and it was just that opportunity, you know, to have a broader education, and that's what I was asking about. Right, I think this is my final one. Paragraph 3.4 about us being the provider of last resort in Trumpington for early years. I mean, I'm quite pleased that we are able to do that, but is this an issue about there not being people to come forward to provide nursery education? Are there serious problems there?
The sort of legislation, and it sounds quite a hard term, and it's the way it's coded in the regulations, is where we cannot source a provider at short notice, the local authority can step in and run that provision. So you know, you can see from the Oasis provision we've been the provider of last resort there for some time. You know, there are some challenges around why people haven't come and stepped in and run it, and we've had the same issue at Trumpington. But I'm delighted to say, you know, both provisions are doing incredibly well under the local authority, and we will continue to look at the market. I think it's a really tough time for early years providers at the moment, and we know take up is down because of some of the fears around COVID. So we will continue to run that provision as long as it's needed. And at the moment, we're looking at plans for how we may step in. There is other provision that is unable to continue, and make sure that we can meet our obligation around you know, that statutory provision for early years. So it's something we'll keep a very close eye on, and hopefully we will get somebody to run it. But at the moment, we're happy to run it to make sure it continues.
No, I'm not complaining about us running it. I mean, I just think it does raise the issue, which I think you've hinted at in other meetings, that there could be a huge funding issue for nursery, for preschool education generally. And I just wondered if this was a reflection of that. I mean, I'd be very happy for us to running it all. But,
I think this particular example, Joan, was more an issue of some of the complexities of leases and arrangements that weren't perhaps foreseen when the school was built, and certainly some learning's gone on around providers and how we may pick up and run these provisions. So there's a bit of learning going on here as well.
Thank you very much, Simon. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Netzinger.
Thank you. I'm afraid I've got 7 questions, so I'm not going to take them all one by one, Jonathan, but I will take them in 2 blocks so that you've got a bit of a chance to do some of them and then the next lot. The first thing I want to say is not a question. It's to echo what you, the thing you mentioned at the very start about the system working together and coming together, and how everybody across the school system in Cambridgeshire just pulled together to try and make things as good as possible for kids. And I think I absolutely echo your thanks, and in particular to Andrew and the people you mentioned, but actually to every head, every member of staff in every school across Cambridgeshire. And I think it's really important for us to remember that there's been a whole lot of stuff in the press about how schools have gone back, which kind of makes it seem as if they weren't there. Actually, members of staff in schools have been working flat out all the way through when schools closed in March until the beginning of the summer holiday. And then it wasn't exactly a relaxing summer holiday for many schools, with the A-level fiasco followed by having to deal with changes to what they were expecting for GCSEs, and then last minute guidance coming in. So I think it is really important that we note just how hard teachers have been working throughout the last 4 months. I think that there's a danger from some of the coverage that people think that actually schools haven't been doing anything. That is so very far from the truth, and I just want us to note that. And yeah, do please send our thanks from the whole committee. I don't know whether there'd be support from the committee for sending a letter to schools to say that actually this committee really appreciates the hard work that's gone in from every school to getting the students back, because it's a great relief that they have them. Sorry, that's long. And now my points. The first one is on the post-16 review. It's very helpful to know that there is going to be enough provision and that we do have capacity for the increased numbers that I'm sure will be coming in. So my question on that is not just what the council is doing to make sure that there is provision, but are we doing anything to influence what is being provided? because I think it seems to me that there's a real problem with skills gaps, but that those skills gaps are not necessarily being met by what's being provided in our higher education and further education colleges. And some of that is about careers advice to going into children in schools, perhaps when they're kind of making their GCSE choices, but also when they're thinking about kind of in years 10 and 11, thinking about what they're going to move on to. I'm not sure how good schools are being at letting them know what the options are and what the consequences of various different choices are. So what is the county doing about that? I think it also feels, I mean, I've heard that there's been an enormous drop off in the availability of apprenticeships, which is a real concern, because those are a really good form of education for many, many young people who don't want to carry on in full-time education. But if the employment is not available for them, there will be far fewer places for kids wanting to do apprenticeships. So is the county working on that? I know that other partners are as well, but I think we have a really important role to play in trying to help make sure that there are enough apprenticeships for everybody who wants them. Sorry, my second point is shorter. On the, you say that there were 946 laptops allocated, and then you talk about how you deal with allocation of surplus equipment. And I find it difficult to believe that there is really surplus equipment. So could you just expand on what you mean by that slightly? Because I know that there's a real need for students to have access to laptops, and really importantly, access to broadband. And I think it is really important. I don't know how long everyone will be back in school. I really hope they do the full term, but if that isn't the case, we need to make sure that everyone has access to a device and to broadband, so that every pupil in Cambridgeshire can have access to school, which was not the case in the spring. And the third one, this is enough for now, is on the free school meals pupils. 1,734 new free school meals pupils is an absolutely enormous increase. It would be helpful to, could you tell me what percentage that is? And if you can't, can you send it to me? And also, just for clarity, what does that mean about pupil premium funding? So when do schools get pupil premium funding allocated to them? Will they get pupil premium funding for those pupils this year, or does it have to wait till next year? And that's enough for now. I'll come back to the other ones. Sorry.
Okay. Well, if I start with the sixth form review, we were mainly focused in that review looking at provision and the availability of access to that provision. I think what you make is a fair comment around, what's being offered, the breadth of A-level provision, which, we do look at, and there is a good breadth. I think what we might need to do, and it may be for the committee to consider at some point in the future, and I'm conscious I've got an action still against me, is the role of the combined authority with the skills agenda, and whether we could bring a paper back from them about what employers are saying and how that may link to provision. There certainly is ongoing dialogue between secondary schools and the combined authority and our own in-house skills team. And I'm just wondering, Lucy, it may be beneficial to bring that all together and bring a paper here to a future meeting, because it's not directly within my remit, but I will certainly have an influence over parts of it. So I think that might be a sensible way to go with that. In terms of laptops, we allocated 946 laptops. The DfE gave us more. We knew there were some children that wouldn't have been picked up with our original request. We knew there were children coming into care that weren't in care previously. So at the moment, we have a number left over, and we're just about to write out to schools to allocate them out in line with our scheme. I'd very much like to offer every disadvantaged child in Cambridgeshire a laptop or some physical access. And it's something that we have put forward provisionally as an idea that we would like to explore in some more detail. So we're certainly getting the costings together with a view that we may consider that further. The DfE, and we've just been looking at this in the last couple of days, are opening up another scheme that will enable schools that close to instantly access more laptops for those children that don't have them. So we will be ready to go if any of our schools close, to order laptops for disadvantaged pupils immediately, and hopefully in a much quicker way than we did previously, because they took months to arrive last time. So I'm hoping they'll come quicker this time. In terms of free school meals, I can certainly get you some figures. I'm happy to break it down by some of the geographical areas. I've certainly got that. I haven't got it to hand. I think it's about 15% extra that we've gone up. What I would warn though is that free school meals is on a lag. It takes a while for the data to catch up. So benefit systems nationally take a while to catch up. And every time we get a new request for a national insurance number, we check them again, and we're seeing more of the rechecks coming positive all the time. So I'll get you a firm figure for that. The funding for pupil premium sits separately. That is measured in January each year. So we're kind of in the window now where we need to get as many signed up as we possibly can to qualify for that benefit. We will push again in the autumn. Strongly encourage members, if you've got newsletters and you want a copy of our letter that goes out to apply, let us know. It's a dead easy process. We are going to try and get as many signed up as we possibly can for that deadline in January. It's the January census, so it's the second week of January. We have to have them recorded on roll. So that's what we're aiming to do.
Brilliant, thank you. Just the post-16 thing, I think if we could have a paper on that, I think it would be really helpful. And I know that the Combined Authority is doing some work on it, but they just don't have the same connections with schools and sixth forms that we do. So I mean, it's possible that we should be looking at asking them for some money to fund that work, because the county has the connections and they don't. So home to school transport was my next topic, and yeah, it was interesting to see that started with "in the absence of guidance from government," which I can imagine is a bit of a problem, and I was slightly wondering what implications there are for risk, given that there weren't any, but that there was no guidance. What level of risk does that leave us with? But the other thing I wanted to ask about was one of the key things I would have thought in terms of trying to manage home to school transport is trying to make sure that as many pupils as possible feel safe to walk and cycle to school. And I know that there is quite a tendency for young people to start off cycling in September, and then the amount of cycling to gradually reduce as the evenings get darker. And I wondered if there was any work being done looking at increasing lighting on cycleways, the routes to school, so that more pupils feel safe to cycle even when it's getting darker in the evenings and the mornings. The second of this set of questions is on early years provision, which Joan touched on. And I just wondered if there was anything else. I mean, we were very worried about closures of large numbers of nursery schools. Have you had much indication that that's happening? And this is another one where it might be easier if you sent me some more data later on, but I just don't know whether you've got data on rates of closure of nursery schools and how many are disappearing. And the kind of supplementary to that, is there a threat to nursery schools? I know that there is concern at nursery schools, among the nursery schools, that they're likely to be closed. Where are we with that? Two more. One is SEND. You talked about the substantially improved percentage of plans being issued within an appropriate timescale. Can you tell me what it was and what it now is? What percentage of our EHCPs are being given out in an appropriate timescale? What was it and what is it now? And again, if you want to send me that in a couple of days, that would be fine. And then the recovery, you talk about SEND recovery and a change in the level of funding being given to mainstream schools. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Okay.
Thank you.
So in terms of homeschool transport, we did eventually, I'm sorry, the report was written at different times, so we put bits together, so it might chronologically not make complete sense, but we were trying to give you a cross section. So we did get guidance, came very, very late, and it was vague is probably the best way to describe the guidance we've received. So we have gone above the DfE guidance. So for instance, we've insisted on face coverings on secondary school transport, which technically is not in the guidance. So we have gone above that area. You know, we've got cleaning regimes, got risk assessments in place for transport providers. We've got extra transport for special schools. You know, we did get extra funding. I think I've got the figure in the report, but it stretched as far as it could. And on the whole, actually well received by parents. We have had some challenges around operating routes and changes for students, but it's worked quite well, and we're not having a huge amount of issues. In terms of understanding travel use, it's quite very, very timely question. We launched a survey with parents last week. It's one of the requirements of the grant is to understand some of the barriers to access to schools. And I just, as you were talking, I quickly went onto the survey site and see we've got 1,200 responses from parents already about what their thoughts are around access and transport. And I'm sure in there, cycleways, issues such as that. So I think public bus routes will probably be an issue in there. We're happy to bring a report back that might have some of that in it. Obviously, there has been funding coming to the local authority through the highways team for access and bike sheds and things like that. So maybe we could put an action to get Steve Cox to contribute how that money or his team's efforts might support that more independent travel, which clearly we would like to do, absolutely like to do. Okay, in terms of just going around my scribbles, the early years provision, we have seen a handful, and I'm not going to give you exact numbers here, and I could probably go away and do this for you. Handful of closures. Some are related to financial issues. Some are the natural attrition that we see of early year settings. Some are done because demand hasn't been particularly high as well. So we're not worried. We know there are areas in the county where there is pressures. I have committed, Peter asked this question, I've committed to put a report together on the latest efficiency issues, and I'll happily share that with the committee when that's ready, so you get a feeling for where we are. And obviously we continue to hold a fund of money available for sustainability of those early years providers, so that's still there, and we haven't had huge draws on it yet, which probably reflects that they're holding their own as it stands at the moment. Our big worry at the moment is that, and I mentioned it when I did my oversight, is that we are seeing less children access early years provision as parents keep them off. So one of the things we're planning to do now is you may have seen it, we've done a safe our schools are safe campaign. We're going to do our early years settings are safe type campaign as well, to make sure parents fully understand that we're applying protective measures in schools and early years settings, and children are safe because we need them in school because they will learn and have that positive start. In terms of nursery schools, we haven't any announcements on funding yet. I'm fully expecting the supplementary funding to continue, but that was not part of the financial settlement we got in July, and we wait to see where the government is with that. At the moment, they're viable and they're running. We're making adjustments around one about structures, but at the moment, we're ever hopeful the government fully commits the money going forward, but we at least, as a minimum, hope for extension of that grant for at least another year. In terms of SEN, on-time SEN applications, we've been as low as 60% on time. It's a complex process. There are reasons why things get delayed, contributions from parents. It might be a specialist report, it might be a school not committing. We've been as low as 60%. We've got up to around 82, 83%, which is above the national average. So good progress there. And we're looking at the moment about our systems and the way we work to see if we can make that even better in terms of those approach. But it's still a problematic area, and we're still seeing demand increase all the time for education, health and care plans. In terms of the recovery for SEN, I think we'll bring that back to you as a future report. We've been looking at where we spend relatively more than other local authorities, and one of those areas is our education, health and care plan top-up funding. And our intention is to reduce that more in line with our statistical neighbours. So we will be consulting on doing that in the new year. And obviously I'll bring things to committee when we've got more detail that I can share with you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Simon Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I want to touch on 3.22. It's the Duke of Edinburgh. I just feel a bit disappointed that it is come to this, that that we won't be continuing with this. Can you tell me what were the changes introduced by the charity that's made us do this? Is it COVID? Is it a temporary measure, or is it something that's far bigger that's made us do this?
So the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, obviously it's a national charity. Previously the LA was seen as the commissioning body and would coordinate and oversee the process. The Duke of Edinburgh scheme is now been delegated to schools, so they provide their own. They are awarding bodies, if that's the right way to describe it, off that scheme, and there's a role for charities in it. The role for the local authority has become incredibly narrow. We still have a bit of a coordination role, but we can't sustain it. We used to rely on a lot of income that came from school contributions towards it, and we've been unable to sustain that. But the offer is still there. There is bodies out there providing in Cambridgeshire for the Duke of Edinburgh. We're fully committed to it still running. We just cannot sustain a structure in the council anymore with the resources that we have.
Thank you. Would you be able to tell me the bodies that are continuing with this then? These are the bodies that have obviously got the license to continue.
Yes.
Because, my concern is, sorry, I'm just going to continue, because obviously you've said in the report that you will carry on with the gold within the outdoor centres. Why is there not feasibility to do the bronze level, which is year 9, and the silver level, which is 10? It's those cohorts that are going to be missing out.
Well, unfortunately, I know lots of things. I don't know everything, so I'll come back to you on that one because I don't know. So leave that with me, and I'll make sure we get a written response back to you.
John, just to let you know, Simon, I help every year with my local secondary school in relation to the bronze, and it is the intention for certain schools. I don't know the list myself. I know my local school, which is there's nothing better than taking a group of young people out and showing them how to map read, and it's something I do. And I know there are, but the whole issue with the Duke of Edinburgh Award is getting adults to volunteer to do that, to take young people out on weekends to show them how to map read and give up a day, really, because ultimately they're the key components of making the Duke of Edinburgh work. So my message here would be that, get out there and volunteer.
Well, yeah, absolutely, Simon, totally agree. But we, certainly our local schools, we've been doing it, but we've never been asked to volunteer. If we knew that there was a need, I'd be out, my husband would be out, we would definitely be doing it. If you could give me some bodies that are still doing it, certainly around Huntingdonshire, that would be, really helpful. And also, is it okay, I want to go on to school safeguarding. Is that okay?
Yes, please do.
That's 3.42. I totally welcome these changes. I have spoken with Rosemary and Jason on these concerns, and they went through the list that you see in the report. There is one thing that we did speak about, which I don't see on the list. It was to do with the actual safeguarding responsibilities being written into the employees' contracts. And I can't see that on the list, but we certainly did discuss it. So I just want to make sure that this is still happening. And also, if it is, will it be just new contracts, or will it be existing contracts that it will be written into?
Yeah, sorry, we did slim down the list because the report was getting fairly long, but I can confirm that we will go back and retrospectively add that into the appropriate people's job description and go into a committee about it later this week. So it's being dealt with.
Okay, thank you. Is that conclude your questions, Simon? Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. Councillor Every.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take us too long on this, but I just wanted to add my support to what Lucy said about thanking you and your team in 2.4 and the rest of the staff that we have in schools. And if there's any way that we can let them know how we feel about this, then I think that would be a really good move. I was in a school this morning and I had to monitor the COVID assessment plan, which was really quite useful, and it was quite helpful to see how a school was managing from the ground perspective. I've got just a couple of thanks that I'd like to make, but also some clarification, and then your opportunity to influence, if that is appropriate. So I wanted to say thank you to the SEN assessment team. From the school's perspective, those assessments for the EHCPs were turned around extremely quickly, and I would like to pass on that. And I know that they had support from other members of staff who had come in because of COVID, and that has made a huge difference to the work that's being done on the ground. As a member of the Cambridgeshire Music Board, I watched them move through the transformation of blended learning on instruments tuition, and watched surprise, I suspect, that actually how well you can actually teach youngsters to play music through technology. And that's obviously an area which we will continue to develop from the Cambridgeshire Music Hub. This is really, really important. This digital learning is a really strong strand. If I could ask you for some clarification, I had it's around the tutoring programme. I had understood that actually the tutors were likely to be recruited and drafted in. But I understand that it's much closer to home now, that there is a process where teachers who are currently teaching and ex-teachers and identified people can actually register in order to support in their local schools, which gives a team approach to tutoring, which might not have been so clear before, which seems to be a much better way of doing things, because you're able to use local expertise, and also the importance of being able to understand the needs of the youngsters when planning the intervention processes. So is that, and I know we don't get the money till November, but this seems to be going on now, and that seems a much better way. Is that, could you clarify that that's the way things are happening?
Yes, the National Tuition Programme is a brokered service out to tuition agencies. We've been working with our teaching schools, our research schools, to try and establish our own body to do that, so we can draw on those capacity we have in school through that route and make sure we maximise the funding available from government to deliver that. Obviously, there'll be other providers out there, and we'll access those as well. But I think this is a positive step forward, that it's a sort of school-led, local authority-driven, teaching school-driven approach, and I'm very hopeful that we'll get people we know and trust to come and work with our young people to support that catch-up. So that's happening at the moment. Don't have a massive amount of details yet, because we've got a little way to go, and we're not over the line in terms of being a provider, but that's our intention, is to be our own provider against that scheme.
Well, that's great, because that puts a positive slant on local need and how it's going to be addressed. So thank you for that. And I know that schools are grateful for the additional finances that have been going into school. And now I'm going to just bring up the thorny issue of Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 SATs for next year, to ask whether you have any influence, if it's appropriate, and you may have a view about the possibility of moving the Key Stage 1s, if there are going to be SATs, which certainly looks as if there are, whether the Key Stage 1 SATs could be moved back, as well as the Key Stage 2. I mean, the Key Stage 2 ones are in May, and we have the 2 months after that. So I just wonder if there is some influence that you may have, as I said, if you think it's appropriate, in actually managing what we get told to do. Okay.
Well, I think we're probably too late, because they've published in the last few days the Key Stage 2 SAT dates. So they're out there now, and they're in the same place as they were previous years. The important bit here, though, is that I don't think our heads in school are concerned about assessing where our children are. I think that's perfectly reasonable. We know children have had a gap from school, and there's going to be challenges to catch that up. I think it's how the data is used, and actually, if there weren't league tables, if it wasn't used to judge the performance of a school, because we've got an unusual circumstance for a period of time, I think that's where we should be making that noise. So, we are talking to leaders. There's several campaigns going on nationally at the moment around, let's focus on getting children happy, back into learning, ready to go, catching up for gaps, rather than being hell-bent on a line that comes in May when they sit there. I think maths is first. I think SPAG is first, spelling, punctuation and grammar tests. and let's get them ready for learning. So I think that's our focus, and I think we should be campaigning to say, don't have league tables. Let's use this as an opportunity to learn where our children are and support them whenever they move on to the next stage of education.
Are you able to clarify what the likely Ofsted programme is going to be in the future? Because obviously heads are nervous about what might come down the line in terms of this. Do you know whether Ofsted will return to do inspections, or whether there's a stay, or what is likely to happen?
So Ofsted will be out in schools in the autumn, looking at how schools are doing recovery. It's not an inspection framework, it is a visit, supportive visit, to see what's going on, and a letter will be written about how schools are recovering. We have some pilot inspections going on in Cambridgeshire this week, where Ofsted are testing that methodology, and we welcome to see how that would work. In terms of full inspections, and going back to what we call Section 5 and Section 8 inspections, they will not happen until January. So we do know that the standard Ofsted regime is suspended until that time. How they will be prioritised and the focus will be something we hope to get more information on. But I suspect we'll be looking at those inspections that are due under law, rather than necessarily other inspections, which they do from time to time. But obviously I'll keep the committee up to date as we hear more around what Ofsted activities are. Yeah,
it's just for the concern that, of course, a large portion of the Ofsted inspection is based on progress, and that's really going to be quite challenging, bearing in mind children have been out of school, but may indeed be in and out of school in the future as conditions change, perhaps. So I think it's the progress issue that most head teachers are concerned about. That was all.
Okay, thank you. We've got Peter, I see you've got a yes next to your name. Is that an indication to speak, or you're on mute?
Is there a request to make a comment and ask questions, if I may?
Yeah, come in then, Peter, please.
First of all, I'd like to back up very strongly what Joan has already said about maths. I would go so far as to say the last thing this country needs is a further narrowing of the sixth form curriculum. We made a huge mistake when we abandoned, or we didn't take up the Tomlinson report many years ago, which was already a much wider sixth form experience. And I think we probably can't do, but I'm very disappointed that we are associating ourselves with a narrow specialist school, and do reinforce what Joan said about using whatever influence we can to make that the students there have a good range of opportunities for drama and for music and for sport, among other things. Anyway, that's a personal opinion. I've got a couple of questions for you, if I may. They're on your Appendix 1. I don't know whether you've come to that yet or not, or whether that's a separate agenda item. It's the COVID Emergency Planning Highlight Report. Can I ask you questions about that?
Yep. Okay.
Okay, right. Two questions. First of all, is just about on page 34 about the test and trace. I've been getting some feedback from my colleagues, my council colleagues, that schools aren't being able to do this, that it's not working. I mean, we've seen the national scene, which is disastrous, but I just wonder in Cambridgeshire, how are we doing for test trace? Because I say I'm getting some concerns.
Okay, so we've had this process in place for some time, where we are highlighted to issues, they are followed up and appropriate action taken, so the sort of process around it is fine. Challenge we've got at the moment is access to testing is incredibly limited. You know, the national picture, I think, plays out locally. What we have been able to do, and from tomorrow, we will have access to some specific testing for education frontline staff. So we don't see closures of schools as a result of inability to access testing. But wider testing for children and the community continues to be a problem. And we've escalated that concern through public health colleagues up to Public Health England. So I think we're doing all we can, but it is a national issue at the current time. But it's not affecting schools. You know, we are making the right decisions about children not coming in if they have symptoms, and we're monitoring that on a daily basis.
Right, thank you. My other question is the impact on page 32, on the impact on Cambridgeshire of the examinations results. Are you able to say anything about that? I mean, we know what happened, and all that sort of thing. Did you get much feedback from Cambridgeshire colleagues about the impact on their post A-level arrangements, particularly?
There were, significant concerns raised, particularly when we were in the period of university offers, when we were using the algorithm. And you've seen local press issues and national issues about offers not being met because of the grades. Obviously, what's happened subsequent with the change in the grades has meant that some universities have been flexible and taken more children in. Others have had to hold the line because they simply don't have the capacity. So, anecdotally, I would say that everything that happened nationally happened locally here. There were obviously students that were marked down under the algorithm. And the consequences of those are going to be far-reaching, and I really hope as a result of this issue around the algorithm, no pupil has missed out on a university place, but only time will tell, and we obviously don't have access to that sort of information.
And what is the local position in relation to FE? There have been some quite disturbing reports about people not being able to move forward into FE. What feedback are you getting on that?
I think our FE colleges have been, incredibly flexible. They're obviously challenged as we are at the moment with COVID and reopening. We are going to keep a really close eye on the NEET figures. We are talking about how we in Cambridgeshire will do NEET slightly differently to make sure this new group of students that fell just beneath as a result of grades are supported. I think the one positive thing is that certainly at GCSE, we saw as a result of centre assessed grades being used initially, probably grade inflation has probably happened. So if you look at the national picture, I think a good pass in English and maths went up 7%. So hopefully, actually, it's set more students on a path to get into FE and other provision. We just need to make sure that they are supported, because they may be at very different places as a result of the use of centre assessed grades. But I know our colleges are very on to that.
Thank you very much, Simon. That's all I wanted to ask. But just like other speakers, I would want to place on record my recognition of the enormous amount of extra work that's been put on schools by the present crisis, and also to make the point that it has been expensive, and that we will have to keep a very close eye on the significant financial implications next year of what's been happening.
Thank you, Peter. Points well made. Joan, we've got Joan now, and then I'm sort of keen to try and wrap this one up. So, Joan, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Simon. Yes, it was just a point which I did ask Jonathan at the Achievement Board, and it follows on from what Peter was saying, which is on page 32, which is about the examinations update. Because I think there are some very concerning things about the way A-levels particularly were managed this year. And it was clear that there was huge grade inflation. All research shows that where it is up to teacher making assessments of pupils they know, they do tend to be more generous than where pupils themselves take examinations. And I think the huge fuss about one or two students didn't get the grades to get into the university of first choice was not unusual. It is quite common. I was the undergraduate course manager for the Education Tripos at Cambridge, and every year I would get a list of the students that we'd offer places to, and there'd always be 2 or 3 who sadly did not make the grade. And I felt that they're storing up problems for next year, because I think it's clear that when students do take exams next year, then the results will not be as good as they were this year. They'll probably revert back to the kinds of trends we've seen before that. And I do think that's very unfortunate, and I think it's storing up trouble. And I did ask Jonathan at the Achievement Board, and perhaps Jonathan, you don't mind repeating your answer, because I wanted to know whether there was evidence in Cambridge for both GCSE and A-levels, whether there was significant grade inflation. But I understand that we're not going to get that information. And what is paradoxical about all of this, that far from COVID-19 disadvantaging students about the exam system, they may well turn out to be the lucky generation who did get their first choice of university, not necessarily on merit. So, Jonathan, I don't know if it'd be useful to rehearse your answer for the committee, which you gave to me on the achievement board. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I made a comment around my daughter being in year 11 this year, and hopefully the extension of those positive grades might be a really good thing. We're not getting any data. There's no published data nationally for this. There's no local authority league tables. Obviously, you know, the result is the higher of either the centre assessed grade, which is the teacher assessment, or the algorithm outcome that's come through. So, you know, we're going to have a unique year. It's going to be quite an interesting year to see what the next year, to see how the DFE may adjust its grade boundaries or its result outcome to try and keep a pass rate at the similar level, or do they reduce it back to pre-COVID levels? You know, it's I'd love to say, you know, exam results are always on merit, but actually there is a bit of tinkering in the background, and you know, we will have to look at that. I'm hoping we'll get some more guidance. Obviously, Ofqual has been through quite an interesting period, and you know, there's been several consultations around how assessments will happen for year 11 and year 13 next year. So happy to keep you in the loop with that. But I think we're not going to be reporting to you any results this year because we haven't got any, and there's nothing to compare against. So that's kind of where we are. So I can take the autumn off, I think. That's all right.
Yeah. Lucy, I'll take you now because you put your hand up, but then I do want to move on. So
I will be very, very brief. I just wanted to respond to what Joan said about the lucky generation, because I really don't think it's ever reasonable to think of the young people that have just been through this year as in any way a lucky generation, and I don't think we should ever suggest that. They have had the most awful 6 months. They have missed out the end of school. They have missed out all of their, I mean, so no birthday parties, no seeing their friends, no, just don't ever think that they're a lucky generation. It's been awful. And the stress this summer for that generation of young people of being given out, kind of handed out a bunch of grades way lower than they were expected when they had had no control over them has been extraordinary. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've had
I don't agree with that.
Okay, well, you can take that outside the meeting then. Okay, so we'll move on. I am conscious of the fact that Mark Goldsack, Councillor Goldsack's here, who's chairman of the C&I committee, and we've got some recommendations here today before us, A, B, and C on the papers. But I really want to give a clear message because, as you know, the Littleport part of the paper, 3.1, the acquisition of the playing fields, is going to the C&I committee for, you know, ultimately the financial decisions, and I just want to give an endorsement from the CYP committee so it's absolutely clear. And what I want to do is propose an additional recommendation. Okay, so I'm going to read it out, and then I'm hoping that someone will second it, and then you can talk about it, and then hopefully we'll agree it and take the recommendations on block. So recommendation D would be support the acquisition of the additional playing field land to ensure that Littleport Education Campus can be developed and expanded in response to the forecast demand for school places and planned housing growth, and request that the Commercial Investment Committee approve the terms of the land transfer. Okay, so it's absolutely just spelling out that what our views are on CYP committee, that there is a need for this, and that then C&I committee can make the financial decisions on the evidence that's presented to them at their next committee. So have I got a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Hoy, thank you very much. So does anybody want to debate that, or are we happy to take that on block recommendations of A to D? I can give the exact wordings to Richenda. I think you've already got them, but is everybody content with that? I see no objections to take the recommendation on block, so thank you very much. And just finally, 2 points. A lot of members have picked up on the thanks to everybody within our education setting. I've probably been closer to this than the majority of members, and you know, when I've been party to some of these meetings that John's had with our secondary heads, they've been absolutely fantastic, tackling the issues as well as sharing solutions, which has been absolutely fundamental in getting Cambridgeshire to where it is now. And also, I just want to pick up on what Lucy said in relation to writing a letter from the committee. If members are content, I'm more than happy to send a letter on behalf of the committee to thank all our schools and our settings within Cambridgeshire. I'm sure John can draft some words for me, and I'll send that out to our schools, because I do think it's important that we as a committee recognise the efforts and the commitments of all our schools, not only in school term, but also during the summer holidays. There's been a lot going on behind the scenes that we only know half of it. So if everybody's content with that, then that's what I'll do. So anybody got any objections, raise their hands. Okay, good stuff. So we'll now move on then. Okay, so just bear with me while I switch screens. Okay, so we'll now move on to agenda item 7, which is the outline of people and communities' priorities in the recovery plan. Lou, I think you're going to start off with this, aren't you? So if I can hand over to you, please.
Yes, thank you. So there's a presentation to go along with this, which hopefully will appear on the screen shortly, as if by magic. Obviously, the oversight report that we have there covers adult services as well as children and education. And I think members will be familiar with the approach that we like to do around this time of year, which is to sort of start to set the scene in relation to thinking about business planning for next financial year in the September committee, and then come back in October with some sort of harder and faster proposals, if you like. So this is very much the intention here. I'm going to start talking about children's social care and early help services, and then John will talk a bit about education services. And I suppose the bit that I would want to say, I've got some details about context here, but I suppose the bit that I would want to say is that it is really challenging at the moment, particularly in children's services, to get a grip on what the likely impact is going to be of COVID and of the lockdown, particularly given that COVID is still continuing, of course. It's not necessarily the case that it's all going to fit neatly into the business planning and financial year kind of process, if you like. So in terms of context, I think growing consensus across not just within Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, but within the Eastern region and then nationally, that there's going to be a long-term impact and the lockdown, particularly for vulnerable families, and harm, if you like, or disadvantage will emerge over time. And the kind of sort of delayed impact of the fact that many children were not in school. And we have to remember that for vulnerable children, whilst they were able to be in school, there's a bit of background noise. I hope let me know if it's causing a problem.
It's fine. Carry on, Luke.
For children that were not in school, although vulnerable children were able to go to school, actually attendance was quite low amongst those groups. I think the other thing that we're concerned about is the potential economic impact. So we've had the lockdown, we've had disruption to schooling, as people will be aware, but we also know that there's a potential for quite a significant economic downturn, which we haven't got to yet. And we know that likely, the people that are most at risk there are families who have the fewest means, have lower job security, less secure housing and so on. And there is some evidence that where families are already struggling, actually increased financial stress compounds. So their response to children in their household is less contained, perhaps, as it would be when they're under less financial stress. We know that children and young people from Black and minority ethnic groups are likely to be disproportionately impacted, and that's a kind of multifaceted impact, if you like. So children from those groups tend to live in areas of the county where housing is less good quality, tends to be a bit more overcrowded. But also, of course, adults from those communities appear to have had more significant health impact. So children from those communities may have been more likely to lose an adult relative. A group that I'm worried about is young people who were already struggling with going into school 6 months ago, you know, and becoming disaffected. We've yet to get really detailed attendance data. The indications are positive, it has to be said, and we're likely to be talking about small numbers here, but small numbers in this group can be, you know, quite significant in terms of impact for those as individuals, but also actually in terms of the costs associated. So, you know, this is the group who are more likely to become involved in child criminal exploitation, county lines, child sexual exploitation, where perhaps difficulties with mental health issues overlaid with non-school attendance, challenges at home, make it more likely that they may come into the care system. And if they do come into the care system, they will be in relatively high cost placements in all likelihood. Children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities are likely to be significantly impacted. And again, there's a kind of combination of reasons for that. Many families of children with complex disabilities particularly were really, really scared during the COVID period and through the lockdown period, and didn't want their children to go to school, didn't want support services into their home, because they were just very worried about the health implications for their kids. The issue with that is that, you know, you may well, or they may well have built up difficulties for themselves, in the sense that, you know, families burn out when they're caring for very challenging, for children with challenging disabilities. And now we're heading back into the school situation, actually for many children, so children on the autistic spectrum, for example, the challenge of getting back into the routine of going into school may well be even more difficult than it is for other kids. Young people leaving care, particularly vulnerable group, as we all know, more likely to be vulnerable as a result of not being in education, employment and training, and along with other vulnerable young people, more likely to be moving into work through sectors that are going to be more significantly hit by any downturn. So the hospitality industry, you know, the service industry, all the rest of it. We're also concerned, of course, about smaller numbers, we hope anyway, of children at acute risk of safeguarding, because they just haven't been as visible. You know, and we know this. Reduced health visiting services, for example, they've largely telephone based. They haven't been going around and doing face-to-face visits. So whilst our services have been doing face-to-face visits, it's been the only one, and we can only do that. And we have, only done that with cases with children that we know about. So there is a concern that there's a group of kids who have remained under the radar and who may emerge as school and earlier settings start to come back into life. If you move on to the next slide, please. The next slide. We stuck? Yes. So the next couple of slides are essentially some demand forecasting that business intelligence have been thinking about and looking at. So this is the number of children. This graph represents the number of children who are open to children's social care services as opposed to early help services. The green line essentially follows what was the trend data up until when this was run at the beginning of June. Then the middling line, the yellow line, is assuming that there will be a 25% increase in referral activity, and the red line a 50% increase in referral activity. Now, we were reducing the numbers of children open to children's social care. We've reduced the numbers of children in care, for example. We've got fewer children in child protection plans than we had. So things were moving in the right direction, really. What slightly alarms me about this, although it was very early days, and in my October report, I'll have more information about what's been happening over the summer. The blue line there overlaps the other coloured lines, and that's because data was available after the modelling was done, and that kind of shows that it's tracking closer to the red line than the green or yellow. I'm hopeful, I have to say, that that's you know, a short-term blip, to be honest with you. We did have a significant reduction in the numbers of children referred at the beginning of the lockdown. Actually, that's come back up to historic averages, more or less. It's still a bit below. So it would make sense that we would have a bit of a peak in terms of overall numbers open over the summer. It's a bit early, and in relation to a lot of stuff around planning around children's services, it is actually really quite early to come to any firm conclusions. We will continue to model on this basis, though. You can put the next one up, please. So this is showing the same in relation to child protection. So this is children open to a child protection plan. And again, the green line, I think in this situation is probably, you know, as incorrect as the red line, to be honest, because we have seen a reduction in numbers of children open to child protection plans, but I wouldn't be expecting to see a particularly much of a further reduction. I would expect that, had COVID not come along, to now be remaining fairly steady. So again, there is a bit of an increase that you can see there by the blue line. And I think as time has moved on, what we have got to a position of is that, you know, virtual visiting to children and to families has been okay as far as a means of maintenance is concerned, but it's much less effective at moving work on. So what you've got is a situation where children are spending a bit longer on child protection plans because it's more difficult to get the work done. And if you move on to the next chart, please, this is for children in care. Again, for children in care, it's more difficult to move children through the care system. So we have seen a bit of an increase in the numbers of children in care over the last, just most recently over the last couple of months, which, as you can see, I mean, they were going down quite nicely. This seems at the moment more to be about it just taking a bit longer to finish work. So a really good example is in relation to moving children from their foster carer to an adoptive carer, which is a fantastic thing to do. We do quite a lot of this work, but doing virtual introductions and managing virtual contact to enable that to happen has simply taken longer. And so children have spent a bit longer in the care system. In case people are thinking, where do I think the numbers of children in care are going to land? I think they will be between the purple and the green line rather than any more serious scenarios here. And I'll explain a little bit why a bit later. We move on to the next one. So this is just trying to give a sort of indication really of the kind of things that we are doing anyway. What you've just seen is, you know, perhaps a glass half empty kind of view of the world, really. There is an opposing view that says that, you know, families have been incredibly resilient and are likely to have continued to be incredibly resilient over the 6-month period, that most have done remarkably well, and the sort of difficulties that I'm talking about there won't really emerge in quite the numbers that some people are concerned about. There was an interesting piece of ethnographic research commissioned by Essex County Council, for example, looking at how families were managing in the just about managing category. And what that was finding was that they were getting along okay. Where they were struggling was to meet the educational needs of their children. But in terms, but their focus, and they were saying quite clearly, our focus is on maintaining our children's emotional and mental health during this period. We haven't got the headspace to do the education stuff as well. And that might be where some of the longer term disadvantages come through for children, of course, from more vulnerable groups. But, you know, we have got a good set of services. We have our evidence-based approaches to improving outcomes. So family safeguarding is in place, and positively, we've managed to recruit to most vacancies in that service, including the adult practitioner services. We've got a good early help service, and some of the advantages actually, or some of the benefits. So what I just said about virtual contact, we also know that for some groups it's been positive. So, you know, families have been, particularly in parents, have been willing to go and use virtual forms of parenting support, for example, and perhaps more willing to do that than come into a centre and acknowledge they've got a problem or a difficulty or they want advice and support. It's been more accessible to use virtual services and support services. So I think as we move forward, we're just going to have to do all we can to build a kind of public health approach to community resilience, thinking communities, supporting schools, supporting virtual services, universal services, in order to manage any demand that might arise. And next slide, please. So I won't go into detail here. I've covered, I think, most of that. So if you can just move on to the next one. So this is just a quick summary of some of the outcomes that I would want to see, and some of the potential financial implications. So this is very early thinking, really, but we, back at the beginning of this process, MCHLG asked local authorities to give some sort of an indication of where they thought there might be higher levels of spend. And we said we thought that we might need to be thinking about £500,000 pressure in early help services, a similar in children's social care services, a similar pressure in children's services, children's social care services, and, you know, possibly, you know, a pressure in around short breaks, and possibly some pressure actually around children in care budgets. Now, obviously, the risk here is if MCHLG doesn't provide that funding and that demand does come through, it hasn't, I have to say, short breaks, there has been a bit of pressure in terms of short breaks actually, but elsewhere it hasn't started to come through yet. And I think largely that's because, you know, schools have only just gone back. When we wrote those bids, we were expecting schools to be back around the middle of the summer term. So it was at early days, but I do think there are likely to be pressures. I just don't think they're going to be contained within this financial year. I think they're likely to cross over into the next. Okay, and I think next one's the last one for me. So for me, and thinking about the budget planning process for the next committee, I think, you know, it's, as I say, it's really difficult. I think we will be in a much better place to start understanding some indications around real increase in demand and need over the next probably 3 to 6 months. We will have a bit more data for you next time because we'll have started to see some of the impact around schools going back. I think we will start to see a bit of a slowing in some of the reductions. So as I say, numbers in care, numbers open to children's social care, and so on. I think we are likely to see a continuing impact for the next 18 months, possibly 24 months. And actually, I think at the very beginning of the pandemic, what everybody was worried about was that there would be an overwhelming kind of surge of demand around now. I don't actually think we're going to see that, despite what the modelling says. I think it will be a slower increase in volume. I do think that we've got some vulnerabilities around some small numbers, and I emphasise small numbers of young people who develop some really challenging needs. Those are my slides. I think probably best if John goes on to his and then we take questions. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine. John, come in, please.
Okay, so I think I'd echo some of Lou's sentiments. I think we don't yet know what recovery looks like. I think as it feels to me today, I think we're very much still in the COVID crisis, and you know, we're responding to those challenges going forward. So what I've tried to do in the slides I've got is just really give some thought to what comes next and the way we're working, and probably some of our priority areas. So under 4 really key headings. So you know, firstly is that recovery piece. You know, how do we support leadership to return to business as usual? You know, what is it we're going to do? How do we work with government? How do we work with others? And how do we make sure in this period where COVID is still out there that we make sure learning continues? So, you know, our focus is very much at the moment supporting that leadership role and making sure children's education is back on track and moving forward. Obviously, you know, academic achievement and progress, we've talked about that. We're not going to have those measures there going forward. So, you know, we do need to get people ready. So, you know, we work very closely with Ofsted during the COVID situation We've got really good planning documents that we've developed for schools to get themselves ready. You know, we want to continue to think about school improvement now. It's a great opportunity to reset things. So we're doing some work at the moment with another local authority looking at how we develop the wider curriculum. You know, what is our offer for history and geography and other subjects at Key Stage 2 to take that forward. But also some very specific things. So Lucy's mentioned this already, you know, I'd like to develop an ICT equipment program for children that need it. You know, we know the gaps are going to be large. What I don't think we know yet is where the gaps are. And I don't think it's going to be exclusively in the disadvantaged groups either. So, you know, we've got some thinking to do and some measurement to do, if that's the right way of describing it, to make sure that the focus comes back onto academic achievement and progress, and that we're ready for the next phase, which I'm very much viewing as being the spring term. Just moving on to the next slide. Obviously, the support to vulnerable pupils needs to be key. So the last two slides talk very much about whole school, whole setting recovery. You know, there is going to be some changes and challenges we have around you know, some of our key groups. So SEN is very much focused in the first area. You know, the statutory process is being back on track. We have been able to use best endeavours to meet SEND needs, and that change in the legislation expires at the end of the month. So it's being really focused in on how we're going to support those children and young people to catch up and be supported in school when it's a very different environment. You know, we are seeing some of the challenges come out already. You know, Lou's mentioned this, it's starting to come through. One of the areas that I've noticed is we're seeing an increase in our elective home education cases. In the first week of term, we saw around 100 extra registrations for elective home education. And that was up about 400% on the previous year. So we are, you know, really focused in on understanding what that need is. Is it normal activity? Is it COVID? We think it's about half of the parents have cited COVID as the reason why they've selected home education. Maybe that's fear about coming back, or maybe that's success at teaching at home and the resources that are now available. Things like the Oak Academy that government's made available. But we need to make sure children are safe, and that's going to put a different pressure on my services with more children needing that type of support. And the final section is then all around vulnerable pupils in terms of you know, sort of specific key areas. So, you know, we know behaviour is going to be more challenging. We've seen some of that already going forward. We know there are challenges with attendance. You know, our attendance figures, I'm really proud of where our schools are. We've done incredibly well. We're right up with the top local authority in the country from the feedback I've had from the DFE earlier about our attendance going forward. But we do know, you know, there's going to be groups that don't come back. We need to work with them to support them to come back into the education system. And I think, you know, the parallels of working with Lou and, you know, when we think about what True Children's Service is all about, I think this is now where we do need to work together, and our deployment, our resources, I think, are going to change dramatically when we fully understand what this means. But at the moment, you know, monitoring, overseeing, making sure we're supporting key groups and making sure our capacity meets need is got to be our focus. So, you know, that sort of gives you a flavour really of what our recovery actions will look like. I'm sure in time we will move much more on to, you know, what a curriculum looks like, how we close gaps in literacy and maths. But at the moment, our focus must be coming out of COVID and getting children back on track. So that's the sort of oversight of where we are with education. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Lou and John, for that presentation and the paper that we've had sent to us in the agenda. I've got Peter Downs with a yes tick next to his name. So Peter, I'm assuming that's your raised hand function that you want to come in? You're on mute still?
Yes, it was, but I should have taken it down.
Okay, right. Thank you very much. Any other members who want to comment? Lucy?
Yeah, just very briefly on Lou's points. So first of all, thank you both, very useful, interesting papers. The point that you were, the concern you were raising about potential increase in high cost placements, I was just wondering where we are with the outdoor centres. I suspect that that's a different cohort of children who might be able to use those, but is that outdoor education capacity still there?
So it is broadly speaking a different cohort of young people, yes. the outdoor centre has been amazing, actually. Well, specifically Grafton Water has been really, really, I mean, that's the one we've been using because it's most equipped. And whilst, I mean, they have had one or two at times, mostly a single young person who's accessed overnight there over the summer. They've also, what's been really helpful is that they've provided day activities for kids where placements have been a little bit, less, or, a little bit shaky, which has worked, I have to say, really well. And the staff have been great and the kids have really enjoyed it. And I think the opportunity to continue using some of that day side of things, we're absolutely exploring. I think the overnight is more difficult, particularly as Grafton and the other outdoor centres need to get back to business as usual when they can. But they've been great over the summer.
Thank you.
Thanks. Just for members' information, Councillor Hoy is having internet problems, so she has turned off her camera for the moment. I've just had a message from her saying that she is here but having trouble. Okay, anybody
I am
else?
here.
Anybody? Thanks, Sam. Anybody else want to comment? I think this is really a moving feast from what we can see here. It's I think it's going to be very interesting when we see the figures at our next meeting in October and meetings after that, really to see what our guesstimations are like and how it's mirrored by reality, really. So, and absolutely, John, you're on the money in relation to, but all our services need to work together. Education settings, children's social care. There's never been a more important time now for us to all be pulling in the same direction. So very interesting. It's certainly watch this space. So I just want to go to the recommendations then, if nobody else wants to speak. I get a feeling of a consensus that we've agreed this approach and we're happy to note the report that's been presented to us. If anybody's got any objections to that, can they raise their hand now, as I'll take it as carried? Okay, thank you very much. And again, John and Lou, thank you very much. We'll now move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 8, People and Communities Risk Register. Given Wendy's apologies for not being able to make it, John, I believe that you're going to tentatively lead us through this and then hopefully answer some questions, if any.
Yeah, so I think it's a standard process. We bring this report to you on a regular basis. I think it's fair to say that the focus on risk this year has been heightened. As we went into the COVID situation, a new set of risks have emerged. We were running 2 separate registers at one stage for COVID and non-COVID issues. And what we've presented to you is now the amalgamation of some of these areas together. Obviously, you've heard from myself and Lou, we're pretty much still in the middle of this challenge when other services not so. And what we've presented to you is that risk register, our current ratings and where we think the big challenges are. And I think many of the issues we've talked about today, particularly around some of the financial challenges with early year settings, social care, access to social care and pressures there, reflected in that report. So I'm hoping that the risk register is an effective tool. And we welcome comments on the information we've put in there. And if you go into the later stages of the report in the appendix, you'll see some of the mitigations that I'll be putting in place, or we are putting in place, although I would say there aren't necessarily mitigations to everything whilst we wait for things like government funding to catch up and obviously us to fully understand some of the challenges we face. So happy to take questions. I think myself and Lou contribute some of it. There's wider issues in there. If we can't answer, we'll certainly take those back and can provide answers at a different time, or maybe we refer those to other committees. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks, John. Joan, do you want to come in?
Yes, it's just a quickie. I may have missed this. What is a BAU risk? There's one on page 83. They're sort of scattered throughout the report, and I didn't find a key that said what BAU stands for. Page 83 has got one.
I'm assuming it's business as usual, Jane. So as opposed to COVID issues, they're business as usual.
Thank you. A key would have been useful.
Joking aside, that is an important message you've raised there, because I know we've mentioned this over the years, especially some of the members have been here quite a few years and some members have been here a lot longer than I have. when we're in all our different committees, we can spend more time trying to work out what an abbreviation is as opposed to reading the paper. So it is useful. John, if you can feed back to the author, that would be helpful. Peter.
Yes, thank you. It's on the actual risk register. We saw I see the risk ratings, and I can understand the colours. You know, red is worse and so on forth. But I couldn't understand the numbers. What was it? What exactly are these numbers? Are they out of 20, 100, 10?
So,
yes, sorry.
So, Peter, I think if you go to Appendix 1, the first page of Appendix 1, it gives you likelihood against consequence, and the number is the multiplication of the likelihood against the consequence. So the highest you can get is 25, which is 5 by 5, and puts it in the red category, and it works down that way. So we shouldn't have anything higher than 25, but that does explain the scoring system. And if you check the key, it will match the in that chart against the school.
So you multiply two unknowns together and you get a number.
That's the risk methodology, yeah.
It's a standard. I think many of us have seen this format in all our arenas that we operate in. I think it's a standard type of risk analysis, isn't it, that many of us are used to looking at. But points well made, and I know it's difficult on the appendix in relation to, you know, how do you highlight those and make them as easy as possible to read, but also provide enough information against it as well. So I don't profess to be an expert on that, but ultimately, you know, if we can make it easier to read and much easier to reference to, then that would be a good thing. Any other members? Joan, I see your hand's still up. I take it Peter's as well. Is that just historical hands? Yeah, okay. Any other comments members wish to raise? If not, then we'll just move to the recommendation. We've just been asked to note the report, which we have done. So I don't see anybody raising any hands in objection. So I'll take that as carried then. Okay, so thank you very much. I will now move on to agenda item number 9, which is the agenda plan and appointments and the training plan. So Rashenda, this is where you come into the meeting now, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's just 2 changes to report to the published agenda plan. The first is to the October committee meeting. There's a new item, which is the Service Committee review of the draft 2021 capital programme. And then 1 change to the December meeting agenda, which is the item Home to School Transport Joint Dynamic Purchasing System has been removed as that decision no longer needs to come to committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rashenda. There are no changes to committee appointments that I'm aware of, and the committee training plan is attached. That has proved to be difficult. I know a lot of our seminars have been cancelled, so it is a moving brief in relation to the training programme. So members, any comments? Okay, so that brings me to the end of the meeting. The next committee will be on Tuesday, the 6th of October, which is only a few weeks away now. The arrangements will be confirmed nearer the time, but I suspect we'll still be using this method of operation. So I'll now declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everybody, and I'll see you soon.